Okay. Hi, Ed. How are you?
I'm doing great, Doug. How are you?
Doing fine. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. Nice to have you here.
My
So,
pleasure.
looks like, wow, okay, all kinds of intelligence. You're also a retired United States Marine Corps colonel. When did you retire from the Marine Corps?
I retired from the Marine Corps in 2010.
Did you work in intelligence after that or during that time or?
Well, my career in intelligence is kind of a varied career. So I actually started out in the Marine Corps as an infantry officer right out of college, and I was over on the West Coast for a while. After I got out of my first tour of active duty, I went to law school in Washington, D.C. While I was there, I got recruited by the CIA to become a case officer, otherwise known as an operations officer. So what that means is I was trained to be a spy. So I was sent overseas, did some tours over there, some time at headquarters in DC. And during that time, I had switched over in the Marine Corps Reserve to be an intelligence officer. So I figured if I was going to be with CIA, I might as well do the same thing in the Marine Corps Reserve. So I decided maybe I should go back and try to go and be a lawyer because I actually started out as a lawyer, as I mentioned before CIA. So I get out and I start my career, and 9/11 happens. So the Marine Corps said, hey, you have this special skill set, so we need you back in uniform. So pretty much from 2001 to 2010, I was back in uniform in the Marine Corps doing the same type of things I did for the CIA for the military. And I know a lot of people may not know that the military does similar things to CIA, but we do. So after I rose up through the ranks and I retired, I was then brought on by FBI Tampa Division to be the subject matter expert in counterintelligence for a task force they had there. So I ran the gamut. My intel career is unique in that I worked for CIA, FBI, and the military. And then so when I retired in 2010, I had about 15 years active duty military and about 15 years in the reserves.
That was a good answer. Do you think the intelligence community, generally speaking, is as glamorous as it was back in the Cold War days?
Well, that's an interesting question because I was trained by a lot of the people who were in the CIA from the early days, and they told me all these cool stories. But for those who think that James Bond has any semblance of reality, I hate to burst their bubble, but it really doesn't. However, it still is really cool. You still get to do a lot of fun things, and of course, everything's done in the secret level. So that can be good or bad. It can be good professionally, but it can be challenging in your personal career. Um, but overall, I think for anyone who's wants to get into the community, I would still encourage them. And again, I teach at the master's level program of strategic intelligence out of a university in Boston. And believe me, a lot of people still think being in the intel community is pretty cool, and they're doing their best to break in.
Well, it's a whole different sort of world. I mean, not only because of the collapse of the Soviet Union, but also because so much of it is now online. That's opened up a whole new dimension of spying and cyber uh, that didn't exist back then, right?
No, and that's an insightful point. It opens up a lot of opportunity for us collecting information because so much is on the open source with the explosion of the internet. But as you mentioned, the cyber, it makes us also uh, more open to attacks. So it's also affecting how the intel community does its job as far as collecting data. So what do I mean? When we were operating overseas, and all nations do this, you're operating frequently in alias, or you're trying to hide that acts that you are doing. Well, with all the biometrics and the ways to identify whether a profile is real or not, it's making it a real challenge. And what I did at FBI is I could, and I still can, I do it for private sector companies. I can take a look at someone's social media pages or LinkedIn page, and I can tell what's real and what's not real. So it also helps on the fraud side, because now that I'm out of government work and doing some commercial work, I've been able to help companies dodge a lot of fraudulent efforts that are done, and mainly on the internet.
You can tell just by looking at someone's profile?
I can, because after you do a lot of background checks for years, you can kind of see what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. I'm sure you could do the same thing. If I tried to write a musical piece and I sent it to you, you'd say, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't know what he's doing. Yeah, it's really challenging in these days to create a fake persona, because there's so many ways to check it out. And for example, if you're on LinkedIn, you say that you're a professional with 20 something years in an industry or whatever, I can look to see what the companies are and whether it makes sense. And if you only have like 20 or 30 contacts there, things like that, after you do it for a while, you develop just a experience to determine what looks right.
Well, you should go work at Twitter. Now that Elon Musk took it over, he could probably use you, because that was one of his things, was to get rid of all the fake accounts and all the bot accounts, and you could probably go through and find those very quickly. Yeah,
you can, but if it's an intelligence service, they're really sophisticated, and they'll do a much better job. You would probably knock out a lot of people, but it would be more challenging to determine foreign intel services fake personas.
I see CIA on here. I see FBI. I also see DIA. I've never heard of DIA. What is that?
DIA is the Defense Intelligence Agency. So that is the overriding agency under which all of the military service intelligence programs fall under. So, for example, I was in charge of human intelligence and counterintelligence for Afghanistan, for our military in Afghanistan during the 2003. So I had under me collectors from DIA. They have their own collectors. They have their own spies. And then all the military services have human intelligence professionals and counterintelligence professionals. Think of NCIS. Everyone knows about them.
Oh, okay.
NCIS, they're counterintelligence at the strategic level for the Marine Corps and the Navy. Well, any operation that was going on in Afghanistan, they would come up through my office, and so we could coordinate and deconflict operations. But DIA and the military has more collectors than any other organization. But they collect on different things. They're looking at the military level, where CIA is looking mainly at the great power competition, nation states, and more of the strategic aspects.
So this would be run out of the Pentagon, yeah?
Well, the DIA has an office right across the river in Anacostia in Washington, D.C. But yeah, it's a horrible drive I had to make from one headquarters to another.
All right. So at some point you wrote a book. The book that we have here is called The Gray Apostle, Mission of the Messiah. Is this your first published novel?
It's my first published novel. I've been published in op-eds in a number of newspapers, a lot of professional journals, the Marine Corps Gazette, and others. But this is indeed the first novel I decided to write.
Why did you decide to write this?
Well, I started out writing a short story, and it just kept getting longer and longer and longer. And part of the challenge of being in the intel community is everything you do is at the secret level. So you can't tell your wife, your family, all of the cool stuff you're doing. However, you're really not supposed to divulge that to the general public. So I was seeking a way where I could kind of bring out some cool elements of what it is like to be an intelligence officer. And then I came up with this idea with some friends of mine is, hey, the life of Jesus, there had to be intel going. Now we can debate whether intelligence is the oldest or second oldest profession. I kind of think it might be the oldest profession. But at that time, there's no doubt that the Romans had a well-developed intelligence network. So I decided, well, why don't I write a spy novel and set it in biblical times?
So Jesus is a spy in your book?
Jesus is getting spied upon.
Oh, I see.
And what
okay.
Well, what I didn't want to do also is try to do anything that would go against what the Bible says. So I'm looking at what I believe probably happened when Jesus's ministry was kicked off, and he's roaming around Galilee stirring the pot. You know, the Romans are going to say, "Hey, we got to keep an eye on this movement because it's upsetting the peace," and that's the one thing the Romans didn't want to do. I'm also a history aficionado, I guess, and I took some classes at undergrad and also my master's in international affairs. So I brought that love of history here into the novel. So I made it historically accurate. So all of the names, be the Jewish names, the Roman names were names at the time. The places were places at that time, the names of those places, the topography, everything is accurate. Now, it probably doesn't matter to a lot of people who want a good storyline, but to me, it was part of the storyline. And I wanted to ensure that everything really made sense. But the bottom line is I conferred with a number of friends of mine who were in the military and intel, and no one believes that there has ever been a book that has made this kind of connection with intelligence operations during biblical times.
Well, it sounds very interesting. Now, would it be a giveaway if I asked you which one of the apostles was the mole?
Well, I think everyone would probably guess which one it was. But okay, so we're talking about Judas. But what the book does, it tells how did Judas become a traitor, and how did that really work? He didn't just walk in and turn Jesus in, you know. So we have traditional intel operation in the book where the Romans are trying to recruit someone inside Jesus's ministry. This is what goes on all over the world in intel. You try to recruit someone who's an insider. And at the same time, the good guy, the gray apostle, he is working to thwart the Romans and what they're trying to do. So going back to my profession, I worked on the human intelligence side. So what human intelligence officers do is try to steal information. What counterintelligence officers do is try to prevent the enemy from stealing it. So I had both sides working in the Gray Apostle, where the Gray Apostle was a counterintelligence guy trying to stop the bad guys, the Romans, from finding out information and disrupting the mission of the Messiah.
Well, this sounds like a really interesting concept. I have to give you credit for being unique because I don't think I've ever heard anything quite like this book. It sounds very interesting. Now, how long has it been out?
It's just been out about 3 or 4 months. And again, this is my first novel, and I didn't know how it would be received. It seems to be very well received. And I've even had some people who said, and obviously it's, you know, everyone says, oh, it would be a great movie. But I actually had some local, and I'm in Florida, some local people who were interested in that. But I'm not so sure that I'm ready to go there yet. And frankly, I like to get a little more exposure to see what other people think before I go that route. But everyone in the military likes it. Christians like it. And it seems to have caught on a lot with young men. And I think that's because there's a real great bad guy that everyone loves to hate. And I guess you always need that in a good novel.
Well, I'm glad you're not getting any kind of negative reviews saying this is blasphemous or anything. You're not getting any of that, are you?
No, I was very careful. Just like I said, I made sure that everything was accurate historically. Everything is accurate biblically. And I didn't want to do that because if I had Jesus speaking words, it would be mainly from the Bible, so it would be quotes, and that way I could develop the characters who were working for and against him, the Gray Apostle and his group, and the Roman intelligence officers and their folks. So no, I think that may be why I'm getting, religious people seem to like it, military people who aren't religious seem to like it, and the intel guys get a great kick of trying to find the various methods that we use within the book.
Well, that's great. Well, Ed, we got to wind this down. We are out of time. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Do you have a website you want to give out?
www.thegrayapostle.com.
And there's links to where you could purchase the book through there?
Yes, it is.
Okay, super. Well, thank you again for coming on. Thank you for your service to our country. And best of luck with the book. I hope it does well.
Thank you, Doug. I appreciate it.